Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155 from UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not?
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcasts. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championship, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championship, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnel De Leon, and hopefully your day is going well. Wherever you are, whoever you are, hopefully your day is going well for yourselves. Stay safe, be healthy. We are still in the recovering period of 2020. One could say that 2020 was a year of suffering, but one person did say that suffering is a path that is needed in order to be great. Which is why today's podcast is going to be discussing Chatri Sityodtong. So, One Championship released a mini documentary, like under 20 minutes, about 18 minutes and 20 seconds, on Chatri Sityodtong, who is the CEO and founder of One Championship. One of my New Year's resolutions is to go and be into more than just one or two mixed martial arts organizations. I know UFC, I know Bellator, but I also want to get into Invicta, I want to get into PFL, and one organization that I really do want to get into because my brother and my sister, they've been hyping it for years, is One Championships. So One Championships is an organization, it's the biggest global mixed martial arts organization in the world. Global in the sense that while UFC, it's mostly focused towards a Western audience, One Championship tries to appeal to both the Western audience and the huge East Asian markets. So, for me to get into One Championship, I have to understand Chatri Sityodtong, the CEO, the founder of the organization. And upon watching this documentary, by the way, it was really easy to understand Chatri Sityodtong's, character. Chatri Sityodtong, the way how I describe him is that he has a lot of main character protagonist energy. And throughout today's podcast here, I have to compare and contrast him along with Dana White, because we're discussing the two biggest MMA organizations in the world, the UFC and One Championships, and the way how both these people, who are basically the figureheads of the company, Dana White being the figurehead of the UFC, Chatri being the figurehead of One Championships, they're both similar in some ways, but very different. And I'll do a discussion and talk about it, because they're very important figures in the world of MMA, but how they got to the point where they are, where they're both billionaires and super successful, stems from two very different paths. And looking at this documentary really does make me look at Chatri in a specific way. Not like there's a specific way how the documentary spotlights him, because Chatri Sityodtong, I still say this right now, he does come across as main character in some video game or for some TV show or movie kind of vibes. The way I describe Chatri versus Dana White is that Dana White is your weird uncle who's gonna go insult you the second he sees you, and then gives you $100, then walks away. That's him. He's like the lovable weird uncle that you see once a year. He's gonna come in, give you the big, strong, firm handshake, and then he's gonna insult you and then make fun of your hobbies or whatever you're into. It's oh man, you like action figures? Wow, what a nerd! Oh, by the way, here's $100 sports. Come on, be a good kid. Go out there and buy something. I don't know, buy something manly. That's Dana White. For Chatri, he's the cool uncle that you don't know all that well, that is very pretentious. So while Dana White gives you $100 and insults you, we have Chatri who will give you the $100, and then he'll pull you over to the side, and he was going to tell you this long story about his life and be super philosophical. Heck, even his mom and people who are in the circle of Chatri say the same thing. he seems very philosophical. He's a very philosophical guy. Like, the word philosophical was shown several times because they have subtitles, and you see philosophical several times when discussing the guy. And when you look at Chatri Sityodtong, he is the type of person who you can tell enjoys listening to themselves. Like, if you gave Chatri Sityodtong 1 hour and there's a camera in front of him, he could go on forever. He could go on about the philosophies on life and the purpose and the values of money and all that stuff and what it means to be alive. Like, he seemed like the type of person who could talk for a long period of time, and it's just going to be an hour straight of him giving you like lessons, like life lessons and advice about how, like, but it's not even like advice that's empirical. Like, you think like, oh man, Chatri Sityodtong here, billionaire, all right then, founder, CEO of One Championship. Oh man, I like to hear his advice. But almost every single dialogue, everything Chatri says in this documentary, this very short documentary produced by One Championships, is just Chatri saying stuff like, I'm a firm believer that suffering causes heartaches. And then heartaches cause, he puts like his hand in his mouth. He's like giving the tear. He breathes heavily, then goes like, close his eyes. Then he says, I think suffering makes you stronger because life is all about struggles. And then through struggles, you can go and become a better person. And then as you become a better person, you get to go and influence others to become better than what they actually are in order to seek improvement. And everything this guy says comes across as one of those self-help books. Because if you ever read self-help books, and I'll tell you right now, I'm going to be honest, I don't read self-help books, because every time I do try to read a self-help book, it's like very pretentious and like overly philosophical. Because there's nothing wrong with being philosophical at all. There really isn't, though. But if your entire shtick, but I cannot read 300 pages of people giving me philosophical nonsense. And that's how it is with Chatri here, because even though this documentary was short, you kind of get overwhelmed and you get kind of like sick of it when you hear Chatri saying, you know what? I'm a firm believer that through hardships of life, one can go and persevere to be the strongest warrior that they can be, because fighting is a lot like life in that you use the struggles of what's going on around you to develop and become like trees, and trees can grow. And you're thinking to yourself like, oh my goodness, this guy seems like he would enjoy doing a TED Talk. And then he actually does do a TED Talk. And then there's a specific clip. Like, here's the thing. Whenever there's a One Championship promotion, you never see a One Championship promo being like, here's fighter A, here's fighter B, this is what's going on. It usually is, watch One Championship, and here's Chatri doing like a TED Talk telling you about, hey, guess what? One Championship is about uniting people around the world in order to further develop your heart, mind, and soul, so you can become a greater being that any of you cannot comprehend. It's just, oh my goodness, wow. This guy has to be, like, so he isn't pretentious, he kind of is pretentious. And his heart is definitely in the right place. But there are elements of Chatri that I think I'm supposed to like that makes me kind of like Dana White more, because although many people don't like Dana White because that guy comes across as very hostile, very aggro. There's a lot of people who refuse to watch UFC because they don't like Dana White. That's how much like people hate him. A lot of fighters hate Dana White. Everyone talks smack on Dana White, and the way how Dana White like presents himself, whether it be through interviews or him like on the camera, he always comes across as the biggest jerk in the room. And the more you look into Dana White's career, because when you compare Dana White and Chatri is the type of person who was poor, went to college. Like me, by the way, I'm Asian American, so I'm Filipino, I'm Phil Lam, and so I can kind of relate to the story of Chatri, because there are a lot of Asian Americans out there who have very similar stories. Like my mom and my dad, very similar to Chatri in the sense that they both, my mom and dad came from decent, okay, like middle of the road family, but they were borderline poor, but not completely poor. They're poor enough, they had they barely had a roof in their heads. They're barely eating from day to day. They're barely even making enough money to graduate from college. They're not the most brightest people in the world in terms of academics, but they're good enough to go and pass their grades. And then after high school, they became these overachievers, went to a prestigious college, went over to America, became ultra successful, invested in some things. So the Asian American culture that Chatri does bring here is something that I can easily relate to, because my entire family is very similar to Chatri. My cousins, my aunts, my uncles. If you are a friend of an Asian American, they probably tell you oh man, their parents went through something very similar to Chatri. Being from the mainland, because I'm a mainlander. I came from Abu Dhabi to Philippines to New York to Southern California. I studied in Northern California, the Silicon Valley, so I'm wrapped around technology, software, and how I perceive money is very different from how other people perceive money. But what's interesting about both Chatri and Dana White is the fact that both these people, these two people from two very different backgrounds here, were really close to each other unintentionally. Close to each other in the sense that we had Chatri, who studied in Boston, Massachusetts, around the same time period that Dana White was running his own local gym while attending the University of Massachusetts. We got these two MMA visionaries who are just a couple miles away from each other, who have these huge ambitions in terms of creating a global empire for mixed martial arts. And they never interacted. They've never met each other. Both of them, I've never heard Chatri discuss Dana White. Dana White refuses to even discuss anything about one championship other than the one time with Demetrius Johnson going there. But for the most part here, we have Dana White and Chatri. One guy coming from, he was something, then became nothing, then went to America in Boston, attended college in Boston, became incredibly successful there. And then we have Dana White, who kind of is the opposite of Chatri in America, in the sense that we have Dana White, middle-of-the-road guy here. He considers himself to be kind of rebellious. And then Dana White himself says that he doesn't like school. He's I'm whatever about the university. C's and B's in high school. Went to University of Massachusetts. Isn't his thing. And the huge difference between both of them, from Dana White and Chatri, is what they did when they got to their mid-20s. Because their mid-20s, because up till then, things were very similar. Both of them, they both have passion for mixed martial arts. Both of them come from struggling families. They both go to Massachusetts for college. And then, while Chatri was more focused on the academic side of things, Chatri is a person who is really focused on academics. Then, through his academia and through his connections, was able to go and hustle his way into working with big companies in New York, in the Silicon Valley. Dana White, he went to college. He didn't like going to college. And then he went through being a manager for Tito Ortiz, for Chuck Liddell, made the right connections. So Chatri and Dana White, how I see it, is you have Chatri being the success story in the traditional sense. I'll say right now, Chatri's story is the traditional model minority story. And me being Asian American, I can relate to this. The typical Asian model minority story is that you become successful in America through academia after coming from a struggling family in the mainland. That's how typically the Asian model minority story goes for a lot of families, especially for first generation Asian Americans. That's how the story usually goes. So while Chatri is the, I come from nothing, go to college, become super successful from there. Dana White's thing is, I went to college, I don't like college, it sucks, I'm gonna go and hustle and do whatever I can to go make as much money as possible and survive and I'll go make as many connections as I could to be able to be successful as I can, despite my shortcomings. People give Dana White a flack for his viewpoint that in the world of mixed martial arts, it's all about opportunities. You can't have a career in MMA, in combat sports, in fighting. Meanwhile, someone like Chatri believes MMA to be something more than that. And when you think about how they both grew up and how both of them became successful, coming from their time when they're in their mid-20s, they go through very different paths. One guy through the traditional path, one guy through the hustling path. And so obviously Dana White, going through the hustling path, believes this idea that MMA is an opportunity, while Chatri sees, oh man, MMA is a chance to go and do something absolutely amazing and great, and you can get to change the world. I don't think Dana White is in the same boat as that. I believe Dana White loves mixed martial arts, but he views mixed martial arts in a lot less spiritual sense, much less so than Chatri. And so for today's podcast here, I'll be discussing Chatri in his documentary From One Championships, and this dude is certainly a character. Coming back after the short break, see you soon.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back into today's podcast episode, a special one. I want to get into one championship, but in order for me to get into one championship, I gotta know Chatri Sityodtong. So what I'm be discussing here is what I found through my research and also from how they presented Chatri from One Championship's documentary of him, which is under 20 minutes. Note though, this is a documentary from his own company, so of course the documentary is going to put him in a specific light. And just like Dana White, even though both of them came into mixed martial arts through very different ways, they both have an ego. They both have huge egos, because the first thing you see of Chatri is this slow-mo camera zoom in of Chatri while he's looking out in the window. Like, we all know the scene where, like, you see somebody looking out the window, just being, like, mesmerized of, like, the view. You have this dramatic music coming in the background, and then you hear Chatri speaking. And one of the first things Chatri says is that the path to greatness starts from suffering. Suffering from hardships, suffering from failure. Suffering is needed in order to go succeed in life. And the camera zooms in close to his eyes, and you can see a reflection of Chatri's eyes looking out onto the window. And then we get to the story of Chatri Sityodtong. So immediately, like, one of the first things we hear, like, the documentary, just immediately, first things we see, Chatri posing and talking about, like, his philosophies in life. Alright then. So, for some people, that's a real turnoff already, but let's continue on here. So, Chatri, he was raised in Thailand. His mom is Japanese and his dad is Thai. So we never really know what happened to Chatri's dad here. There are a lot of this, even though this is a short documentary, so of course you can't cover a whole lot of things here. But considering that it's his documentary, technically he produced his own documentary. This is his own company. He ran the show here. He produced this. Alright then. I'm surprised this documentary didn't go that long, because there are a lot of, like, holes in this documentary, like what happened to his dad, or what was the career of his mom and dad. He never really fleshed that out. Like, he showed like images of his dad. He showed images of himself as a kid playing with his mom. But I had to go look this up, because Chatri himself didn't say that, oh man, he's half Thai, half Japanese. He just said, you know what? I was raised in Thailand. My mom is Japanese. She's a hard worker. Like, he doesn't mention his dad all that often. The two times he does mention his dad is when he says, oh, his dad brought him to a Muay Thai training area. And then the second time he mentions his dad was when he said, "Oh man, my dad left me and my mom was heartbroken." That's about it. You know very little about his mom. You know very little about his dad. Chatri does say that he lived pretty well for himself. I would assume he's like a pretty normal middle-class kid. But with the way how Chatri presents himself in this, as he's like telling his story of him growing up, one of the first things he says, like after he says suffering is the path that is needed in order to be a great person, in order to achieve, life's happiness and all the other stuff, he immediately says, like, growing up, I consider myself to be a rebellious kid. Would go to the principal's office, being part of fights, had C's, had B's. He didn't like bullying. I put down here, when he was 8 or 9 years old, his dad took him to Lupunmi Stadium, which is the mecca of Muay Thai, where he was enamored by the events. Then from going to the events, he wanted to be into Muay Thai. His mom specifically, like, he didn't really say what his dad's viewpoint was. All he said that his mom just wasn't supportive of him doing Muay Thai. But at the age of 13, his dad brought him to Sityodtong Gym, which is one of the top gyms in the world. I think it's considered the best Muay Thai gym in Asia. Sityodtong Gym. That's where he got his last name from. There he met his Muay Thai instructor and studied fighting. His family was well off until 1987, where the Asian financial crisis hits, which made his family poor overnight. And one thing I would like to see from this documentary, and there's very little info about this, about Sityodtong. You have to like piece it all in together, but when you look at Sityodtong, and the way how he presents himself in this documentary, he's saying, you know what, I was a rebellious punk. Okay, but like, what did you do to make you a rebellious punk? He went to the principal's office and was part of a couple fights. But what you don't know is that back in the 1980s, specifically, in that time period, there was, maybe it's just Japan, and I know specifically in Japan, there was a whole lot of issues going on with, like, youth violence going on. The movie Battle Royale is supposed to be kind of this, like, mirror commentary on youthful violence and the distrust of young kids, teenagers with adults. That's what Battle Royale, the movie, is mirroring, or what the metaphor, what the message is for Battle Royale. But Chatri never really emphasizes about that part of his life. It's weird because the guy can go on forever discussing about about morality, what makes a good person, what makes a bad person, what it means to be a strong-willed person who never gives up, the meaning of hope, and being a better person every single day. Like, he can go on and do the whole self-help book. Like, the self-help book, like, hey, in order for you to achieve something today, go get a book and write down. Write down your dreams and hopes, and if you write it down, you're going to go achieve it, and anything can happen. Like, he can do that. Because he did that a lot in this. Not specifically the whole, like, self-help book stuff, but he says something that's very similar that you would find in a self-help book. So, he talks about many things in his childhood. He says, I believe that fighting against evil is a good thing. I'm a firm believer that the weak should be bullied. I think people who are bullies are wrong, they're morally wrong, and that someone should stand up to them. Like, he says all that, but he doesn't go into as to the actual fights itself. He doesn't even say, like, oh man, he doesn't even recount any moment in time, because if you hear, like, Ken Shamrock or even Frank Shamrock or George St. Pierre, they also discuss bullying a lot, like discuss bullying and going through the troubles of their childhood. Like, Ken Shamrock did a TED Talk where he goes in depth about the moments in his life, in his childhood, that made him go towards the direction of martial arts, the direction of violence. Like, George St. Pierre also, in the Joe Rogan podcast, talks a lot about his days of being bullied and what went through his mind and what he did to overcome all that. Like, those two fighters, Ken Shamrock and George St. Pierre, they go into detail about their childhood and about these events and about going to the principal's office and about fighting other kids and about bullies and about being picked on and about their childhoods. But Chatri here, once again, this is his documentary that he produced himself. He just says, I was a rebellious punk. I went to the principal's office. I was part of fights. Also, I didn't consider myself that smart. And then, like, it cuts to a medium shot of his baba. And then his mom just says, oh, Chatri, he doesn't study at all, but he gets C's and B's. And then it cuts to Chatri saying, yeah, I don't consider myself to be all that smart. And the way I look at Chatri is that, once again, like me being Asian American, one of the ongoing struggles that pertains to Asian Americans, whether it be a mainlander or you were born and raised as an Asian American, is this idea that you can almost never truly look at yourself and be proud of what you've accomplished. It's weird because my parents have that issue. People in my generation have that issue. I got a lot of friends who are Chinese, who are Vietnamese, who are Korean, Filipino, who all say very similar things in the sense that they really can never say, oh, I'm successful, or oh, I'm smart. Because when you, like, I have some other friends who are not Asian, and they're fully capable of saying, hey, yeah, I'm smart, yeah, I'm hardworking, yeah, I'm proud of myself. But for a lot of Asian Americans, we can never be happy with whatever position we're given. So, because later in this documentary, Chatri does say, well, I had the chance to make $150,000 a year job. There was an opportunity for me to make $250,000 a year doing another job. But you know what? That doesn't make me happy. That doesn't make me fulfilled. I feel like there's an empty void in my heart. Then later on, where he does start his own company in the Silicon Valley, then sells it, and makes upwards of, I think, $50 million? $500 million? Yeah. So he made $150 million off a startup company he developed in the Silicon Valley area. And if you stay in the Silicon Valley area, you know how the culture is. In the sense that in the Silicon Valley, you can make a boatload of money and you can never feel fulfilled. Ever. If you've never lived in Silicon Valley, or if you've never studied there, I studied in Silicon Valley, I studied in UC Berkeley, and in that area, no matter, you can be a person who's making $1 million per year, you can have a big mansion, you can marry your perfect person, and then you can go wake up and be like, you know what? I feel empty. I follow this one YouTuber who does software engineering, who works and lives in the Silicon Valley area, and then she says she feels empty. And I got a friend, he is Filipino, he makes around $350,000 per year. $350,000. The average salary for the average American is roughly $50K to $60K. This guy at 28 years old, $350,000 per year. And he says, well, I think I'm an underachiever. I think of myself as somebody who's definitely underperformed, because that's just an issue that pertains with Asian Americans. It is something that happens in other cultures, but it's heavily prevalent for Asian Americans, and it's especially prevalent in the Silicon Valley area, being an Asian American. So Chatri Sityodtong, he just browbeats himself, even though he really shouldn't, because the truth is, you must have studied. There's no way you can go out and have like seasoned B's if you never studied. And in order for you to, and he ends up going to Tufts University. He goes to Tufts University, which is a private college in Boston, Massachusetts. But what's very interesting about this is that the documentary never goes into this. The way how the documentary was shot, or the way how it was edited, it looked like, alright, Chatri Sityodtong, he graduated from high school, then from there, then he got accepted into Harvard University, after he says that he only had C's and B's in high school. And then Chatri told his mom, oh man, is this a mistake? This can't really be happening, is it? And then I'm watching this, and I'm like, wait a minute, you just said you get C's and B's in school, but you somehow got accepted into Harvard College. Like, how did that happen? And then I had to go look into this myself. So, the documentary says, alright, he graduated from high school, then he, gone to Harvard University, joining the MBA program, which is, Master's in Business Arts. But in reality, he graduated from high school with a C or B, then went to Tufts College, which is a private university. And if you know anything about the private university system, private universities, although they're called private, they're actually very accessible to join. Anyone can go to a private college as long as you have the money and the income to do so. And for a lot of private colleges, you don't need a supremely good GPA. You really don't. Now, of course, there's a college like Pitzer University, which is this university that you really do need a 3.9 GPA in order to go and get into Pitzer College. There are some private colleges like that, but for Tufts College, it was something that it was very attainable for him. It was attainable for him to get to this private research college. By the way, there's nothing wrong with Tufts University. It's the fact that I found it very strange that they skipped over the fact that he went to Tufts University. Remember, he produced this documentary. There was no reason for him to go and say, you know what, let's skip this important part of my life, 4-year university college in America. They skipped over him trying to adjust himself to the American lifestyle, to American culture, him translating, going to an American college, American school for the first time, him moving away from his parents. They never really expanded upon how he got, like, it just says, oh man, his family went through a crisis, he went through the Asian financial crisis, things got bad for him, and then he went to Harvard. How did him and his mom, how were they able to financially secure themselves through the period between him going through the crisis with his family and him graduating in Harvard? There were some holes there. Now, he did try to say that, he worked as an instructor. He worked as an instructor, a Muay Thai instructor in America, and from there, and him saving up on money, he was able to go and pay off his college tuition. And I'm thinking here, wait a minute, so did you working as a Muay Thai instructor help you pay for your costs at Tough College? Did it help pay for your, did you dorm in Tough College? Was your mom with you at Tough University? Because your mom was with you at Harvard, and I don't get the process of, I guess she came from Thailand to go move in with you at your dormitory at Harvard University, I think. Did your mom come with you to America when you went to Tough College? Did your mom just stay in Thailand while you're off at Harvard University? And then when you realized that your mom was poor, somehow again, then you invited her from Thailand to move in with you at your dorm in college? But the documentary just handwaves all that, and, he just teleported into college with his mom, alright? You just gotta accept that. So you're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back after a short break here as I further discuss Chatri Sityodtong.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back. I'm discussing Chatri Sityodtong, and last time we left off here, he is somehow in Harvard University from Thailand, somehow with his mom dorming. Now, Chatri does talk about how it was difficult for him to go and live on day by day. He said that he was spending about $4 per day in order for himself to survive. And I gotta think of myself okay, how does that work? Because he's paying for his college tuition, he's paying extra for his dorm. I'm guessing he's living with somebody in his dorm, so he's not paying all that much, but it's still Harvard University. And on top of that, he still is paying for Tough University, the original 4-year college he was in. So he was able to pay off both Tough University and Harvard College through his work as an instructor. And if you do he's doing the master's program at Harvard. So this guy is paying a whole lot of money in order to attend both these colleges. And he was able to graduate from Tough College, this Tough University. It's literally called TUFT, Tufts University. Private university, very expensive. Went to Harvard master's program, even more expensive. And you add that on top of the fact he's dorming. He is spending a whole lot of money. And I don't know the exact, economics and the finances, how it works in terms of how much money he makes working as an instructor. And I would kind of like to know that. I'd like to know, okay, how much money is Chatri making working as an instructor for a Muay Thai gym? Because he never really focuses in on that. He just says, well, in order for me to pay off for my college, I have to go and work as an instructor. Now I'm thinking to myself, well, did you get scholarships? Were you part of some contest or some stuff like? Were you working multiple jobs? Like, how much money were you spending? He just kept saying, you know what? I only spent $4. I only spent $4. I saved $4, and I use that $4 in order to sustain myself. And I'm not really sure how that actually works. I really don't know. $4 a day, yes, it is definitely possible. You can go do that, but you have to be able to make a lot of your income from somewhere. And yes, he's making income working as a Muay Thai instructor. Alright then, but he never goes into detail how much money he makes as a Muay Thai instructor. So you just have to believe his word that through being an instructor, he was able to pay off everything from both tough college and be able to pay off for Harvard University and paying off for his dorm, and is able to have his mom live there with him. And I didn't know if he was able to fly his mom from Thailand over to America, over to Harvard, or she was always with him at all times. Because now it seems like, okay, he had to spend $4 per day in order to sustain himself and his mom living in a college dorm somehow. And you see the mom, you see the mom talking early in the documentary, but when they get to college, she doesn't say anything. Or she says very little to anything. She says, oh, in our life, we struggled. But that's really about it. You have Chatri kind of describing for her what happened during her time when she was dorming at Harvard. And then Chatri goes on to say, oh man, I had to go keep secretive of my mom living in Harvard because if people knew, then I would be expelled. But we never see or hear the mom's perspective on any of this. I like to hear Chatri's mom be like, yeah, I dormed with my son. I lived with him. Yeah. I want to hear something from his mom. Let me see her take on the story, because Chatri just says, oh man, we went through so much struggles, but I believe that through struggles you can go and become better. My mom was sleeping on the bed. While my mom was sleeping on the bed, I was sleeping on the ground, because I'm a firm believer that hard work and through hardships and all that suffering, you can go on and achieve to be something greater than what other people can say to be greater. And you hear Chatri saying all these words, and other people, including his doormate, saying, Chatri, the guy's a philosophical guy. He's a great person. He's got a lion's heart. And I'm watching this, and I'm like, okay, I can kind of see why and how it is, what turns me off with Chatri Sityodtong. Because on paper, Chatri Sityodtong, he seems like a main protagonist type of person. He's got main protagonist, superhero, altruistic vibes. Look at him. He's gone through so much struggles. Now he's in a good place now. Now he's using the money to go help finance other people. Because in the end of this documentary, the first half is him going through his hardships and him growing up. And in the second half, you see all these people talking about how awesome Chatri is. It's as if he's... Okay, so if you've ever played a JRPG game or any role-playing game from Japan that went over to America, a big reason as to a lot of Westerners complain about Japanese RPG games is there's this main hero syndrome that happens with all the characters, with all the main characters, in the sense that the main characters come across as Mary Sue, premier perfect, they're the best thing since sliced bread, they're amazing at everything, and that's how Chatri is being presented here. From his own documentary, where you're having his mom, you're having all the people he's helped out, give on and talk about Chatri Sityodtong. Oh my goodness, this guy, he is special. He changed my life. He gave me opportunities that I could never have. And you know what? Good on for Chatri for doing that, okay? Good on for Chatri for going out and helping people. He financed a lot of people who are poor. He helped a lot of small businesses. He helped out those who are in need, who can't financially sustain for themselves. Congratulations for Chatri for doing so, but I really did not need to see like 10 consecutive minutes of different people giving their like 1 minute essay summaries talking about how awesome Chatri is and how cool he is. Because Chatri, he only talks when it pertains to like talking over his mom or talking about his business. But when it comes to like, he never, like Chatri almost never talks to himself and says something that's very positive. It's always demeaning, because every time Chatri talks about himself, he's either overly hyping himself up as if he's like the cool, like he's this hardest working guy, superhero dude who is saving people's lives, who's uniting people across the world because of his natural charisma and his talents. He's either doing that or he's saying, I feel empty in my life. Like, those are the two sides of Chatri. And if we're not seeing either of that, we're going to be seeing a talking head saying that Chatri is the most coolest, awesome, sweetest person in the entire universe. And you know what? Even if he is all that, alright then, but they're presenting him in such a Mary Sue way that a part of me finds it struggling for me to actually believe what I'm seeing here, considering that there's some information that's being skipped over. Like, he's skipping over his time as an adolescent, he's skipping over his time as a teenager, he's skipping his time during tough college, he's skipping his time on when he came to America for the first time. He's skipping certain specific information about his life and about his career and how he got to certain points, because the way the documentary is presented, it's like, Sityodtong, oh, he was a bad boy kid who got into fights, and he was not smart at all, but he went to Harvard University, and he's such a good person, he let his mom live with him at Harvard University. Then, since he is such a visionary person, he went to the Silicon Valley and then just became rich all of a sudden. And then he went to Wall Street and then just became rich all of a sudden. And then he made one championships and became even more rich all of a sudden. It's such weird, non-linear editing that's happening with this guy. It seems like he's teleporting. And we're skipping a lot of the meaty, important parts to just accomplishments. I think someone says, which is weird because the guy always says this, where he's saying, the life is a journey, and through journey is hardships, and your hardships will determine and define your journey through the path that we all walk through, and blah, 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 believe in yourself, work hard, never give up on your hopes and dreams. He goes to say all that stuff, but we barely know anything about this guy's journey. This guy just teleports from, like, principal's office to Muay Thai Stadium to Harvard to Boston to New York to now a global empire to now he has a TV show that's like an Asian version of The Apprentice that involves people jumping off airplanes somehow, because you gotta jump off an airplane or climbing up mountains, because The Apprentice promo is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen in my entire life. In order for you to be the apprentice of Chatri, to run this one championship MMA organization, you gotta climb up mountains and jump off like planes, and you'll be able to interact with these world champions who are training to kick your butt, kind of. Just what is going on here? The editing for One Championships beyond the documentary is just ridiculous whenever they try to present Chatri in some way. And I put down here that upon graduating from Harvard University, he had a startup company that made $150 million. I don't know how he did that. I don't know how he got to that point. Being a person who studied in the Silicon Valley, it is a recurring joke there that there are a lot of people who are trying to go and make a startup company, and for every successful billion-dollar startup company there's like hundreds upon thousands of young entrepreneurs failing mightily with their startup companies. And so I like to see a lot more on Chatri's philosophy on all this stuff. Like, what did he do? How did he become successful through like tech stuff? It's like weird. He doesn't even mention what he learned from Harvard. All he says is, like, I went to Harvard and I graduated, and that's about it. Did you learn anything from Harvard? Well, he didn't say anything. He didn't say how he learned from Harvard. He didn't say what he did with his MBA, like how he uses MBA in order for himself to become successful in making his software company, all he says is, I went to Silicon Valley, and then I started a company. That company made $150 million. And then I went to Wall Street, and I managed a hedge fund company that made $12 billion. That's worth $12 billion. And then I launched another $500 million for my own hedge fund company in New York. And then in 2011, I founded One Championships. And here's one thing that he did not mention in the documentary that I thought was incredibly important. There are two founders of One Championships. We got Chatri, and then we have the ESPN Star Sports executive, Victor Cooey. Both of them founded One Championships. Victor Cooey is nowhere to be seen in this documentary. You don't even get to see the face of this guy. This guy's never mentioned. All you hear is, in 2011, I wanted to go and change the world. That's why I started One Championships. It seems like you're missing a whole lot of information here. Like, how did the process go? He talks about Evolve, and that, like, through Evolve, he was able to go and develop it into One Championship. He talks about that very quickly and hand waves it away. But he then goes from, like, yeah, I founded One Championship in 2011. And now, here's 10 consecutive minutes, or, like, no, I say 8 consecutive minutes of me giving away my money to people who are poorer than me. And here's them talking about how awesome of a person I am. And so, like, you see all these talking heads saying, Chatri, I was struggling. And then he gave me money because Chatri is like a lion and he's brave. And his philosophy of uniting and changing the world for the better is, like, amazing and all that stuff. And once again, I don't doubt that Chatri does not have this mindset. I think he does have it. But at the same time, though, it feels very manufactured, very produced, and it seems like we're always seeing, like, the best version of Chatri, because when I say he's got main character syndrome, the problem with a lot of main characters in, like, JRPG games is that they're always being presented in a very specific way that's always catered towards them being awesome or being amazing. You never see this other side of Chatri, and I'm not saying that there should always be this dark, evil side of every person, because that's very cynical to think of, but the way how Chatri is always being presented, it makes him come across as, like, one-dimensional. He comes across as this amazing, awesome person, and if you don't think he's amazing or he's awesome, then you're wrong, because he really is awesome in all the way. Because one of the things people do like about Dana White is the fact that there are different sides of the guy. He's always showing his side where you're like, oh man, this guy's a jerk side. You got the good side of him. There are moments where he's insulting his fighters, where he's calling out the internet, calling people nerds and geeks and losers. And there's moments like him calling up fighters, telling them how awesome they are, giving phone calls, giving them a pat in the back, giving people bonuses. There are elements of good and elements of bad for Dana White. And for Chatri, from his own documentary that he produced, it's always showcasing him in a positive light. And for me, that just seems kind of sketchy. I will further discuss Chatri Sityodtong here for the last time after the short break. See you soon.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And we are back. And so the documentary ends with everyone saying that Chatri Sityodtong is awesome and amazing. And Chatri says that he believes in uniting the world through mixed martial arts. And after the documentary, I'm looking at Chatri and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I can tell that he is definitely a person who's altruistic, who has certain values and beliefs. And I believe that he is making One Championship, presenting it the way it is, for a good reason. In the documentary, he says that one of the key reasons that he wants to make One Championships is to inspire real-life superheroes. And so it definitely does seem like he wants to create this weird relationship with viewers and the product he's making with the fighters. in the sense you're supposed to hero worship the fighters. I think that's what I'm getting off from the documentary. Like, he says, I want to inspire real life superheroes, and that when they see my fighters, they'll be inspired by them as if they're large, larger than life figures. And I'm looking at that, and a part of me also kind of thinks that, does he want people to hero worship him? Because in almost every promotion for One Championships, the fighters are almost never promoted. It's always him being promoted. When even in the One Championship, like Unbreakable 1 and 2 shows, yes, they do like show hype packages for the fighters, and sometimes they trash talk. But one of the reasons as to why it is difficult for Westerners or for some people to get into One Championships is the fact that a lot of these fighters come off as the same. The narratives, there are no narratives in One Championships fights or events. There's just one singular narrative. Because in, whether it be UFC shows, Bellator shows, PFL shows, Chael Sonnen said it best, in that a big reason as to why a lot of people are into sports is because of storylines, because of the narratives, because of the rivalries. But in One Championships, all those are taking a backseat over this umbrella that is Chatri's vision for One Championships. Because every fighter, even in the hype packages, are presented very similarly. They're presented as to, oh man, they're like the beacon of hope for every young kid out there to strive to become, a hardworking, good person. I understand what Chatri is going for, and that he wants to make his fighters come across as amazing and great, larger-than-life, true inspirational heroes. And I understand that the Western audience are not going to get that, because we here in Western America, in the West, we love controversy, we love drama. There's no way a fighter with the personalities of Colby Covington, with Conor McGregor, with John Jones, even someone like Daniel Cormier, Khabib, there's no way fighters with those types of personalities can ever thrive at One Championships. And it's because every champion, for one, is presented and heralded as a beacon of light for hope, hope, truth, and justice. It's as if every person there at One Championship is supposed to be like Captain America or Superman. There's this beacon of altruism, and it's all under the umbrella of Chatri. And I'll give my 2 cents on that, being both an Asian American and also as a Westerner. In the sense that one thing I do love about UFC, and I know it is a turnoff for a lot of people, is the fact that there's a lot of different characters. I love variety. I love variety. I love diversity. And when I say I love the variety and diversity, I mean I love the different characters. I love the different stories. I love the different rivalries. And in One Championships, they don't really focus in on rivalries. There are rivalries, but the rivalries are never bigger than the actual company in itself. Because you can argue that because Khabib versus Conor McGregor, that rivalry, that goes beyond than just UFC. There are people who do not watch UFC, who do not watch mixed martial arts, and they know that there is a rivalry between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor. But for One Championship, since everyone's fighting for honor, for glory, for being a superhero, you don't get that level of intensity. That's why it sometimes does feel like that there's low energy in the fights. Sometimes it feels like there's almost nothing at stake, considering that One Championships, that their ranking systems is only 1 through 5, and that very few often these ranked fighters even fight against one another. And then we have the Adamate Grand Prix right around the corner, where we had Meng Bo. She had to go defeat an unranked fighter in order to be part of the Adamate Grand Prix, even though she's ranked number 2. While the unranked fighter, if she defeated the ranked 2 fighter, then she would get a buy-in for the Grand Prix tournaments. What's going on here? What? I don't get it. And in the promotion, in the actual One Championship events, I see a lot more promotion and a lot more emphasis and production values being given towards Chatri's apprentice show. It's strange because the hype packages are about maybe 30 to 55 seconds long, maybe a minute 15. They're doing this like one championship countdown thing that's only about 8 minutes long per fighter. They're not even doing they're doing these kind of like UFC countdowns where it's like 40 minutes or 45 minutes where you're going into the life of these fighters. For one championships, they're doing something very similar, but they're doing it for these fighters, and it only goes like 8 to 9 minutes, and it's them like independently, and you don't really see them discussing or talking about at all on their opponents. There's no narrative because all the one fighters have the same narrative of they're fighting for honor, for glory, to be real life superheroes. Yes, the same thing can be applied to UFC also, in the sense that a lot of UFC fighters are fighting for the money, for the pride. Okay, I get it. But it seems like there's a lot more nuance to it for the UFC, because you can get different fighters from different backgrounds, like Colby Covington, Cody Garbrandt, Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov, Daniel Cormier, Francis Ngannou. They all have very different stories, very different narratives going into their respective fights. Which is weird because in the documentary from Chatri, he says one of the reasons he loves MMA fighters is because they all come from different backgrounds. But in the documentary, he never dials in or focuses in that at all. I would have liked it if you went on and said, okay, here's Brandon Vera's story. Him being a former UFC fighter, had an underwhelming career in the States, went over to win championships, became a megastar in the Philippines. Here's Angela Lee's story, this young prospect who was inspired by Ronda Rousey, who at the age of 24 years old is one of the best fighters in the entire world. I would like to see a lot more different stories, a lot more variety, a lot more diversity happening in these fighters, other than the fact that they're real-life superheroes, and they're pretty much presented as babyfaces. So for those of you who don't watch pro wrestling, we got the terms heels and babyfaces. Babyfaces are the good guys. And for one championships, all the fighters are presented as babyfaces. And because they're all presented as babyfaces, every fighter comes across the same way. Yes, all these fighters do indeed have different backgrounds, but they're presented as if they all don't, and they're all very similar in terms of presentation, in terms of how they're being hyped, in terms of how they're being presented. It feels like there's this level of uniformity happening with one championships, and I think Chatri is too afraid of the idea of losing the idea of his fighters being seen as large-life superheroes at the cost of diversity and interesting narratives. So I know I've kind of been down on Chatri Sityodtong here, but here's the thing. I do like Chatri Sityodtong in the sense that he comes across as somebody who genuinely does love mixed martial arts. I definitely do respect all the hard work he's put into his life, becoming incredibly successful, more successful than I ever will be in my own life, more successful than a whole lot of majority of people in the world will be able to be. But in this documentary, it does come across as very manufactured. It comes across as him trying to place himself in this high pedestal. And when you look at a person like him and a person like Dana White, if you just combine them, if you combined the altruism of Chatri Sityodtong with kind of that attitude and that ability to go out there and not be worried about putting himself in the highest of highest pedestal and the highest standard like Dana White, then I think we could find somebody who's really good, a really strong middle ground here. Because the problem with Dana White is he comes across as a jerk. He does. He comes across as a jerk who doesn't care about fans, who doesn't care about the fighters. I know he does, but he has a very tough time really trying to express that side of him. Meanwhile, we have Chatri Sityodtong here, who holds fighters to a high standard, to a high pedestal. He's altruistic. He believes in the good in people. He wants to do the right thing. But he also has an inflated ego of himself where he kind of comes across as pretentious. And in doing so, he does water down the product because it feels like all the fighters are under the umbrella of him. And instead of fighters in the one championship organization being unique, being different, instead of seeing diversity and variety in terms of fighter personalities, in fighter fighting styles, we're seeing a lot of these one championship fighters kind of blend in together. Yes, they're a lot more stoic. They come across as more morally good compared to the Western fighters like a Conor McGregor and a Colby Covington. But you know what? People don't want to see one thing. They want to see different things. And yes, if you go watch a Western product, you're going to see, a bunch of like bad guy characters, in theory, bad guy characters who act kind of cool that people love, like Conor McGregor and Colby Covington, especially during Conor's time in 2016, 2017. But then you go look at one championship and where it's comprised of like all baby faces, all good guy characters, and the reasons as to why people love certain fighters, like people love Roxanne Modafferi, why people love George St. Pierre, is because those types of fighters, and Khabib and Conor McGregor right now, the current iteration of themselves, where Conor McGregor is, like, he's a constant professional. That guy comes across as somebody who's really humble, who's really appreciative of everything he has. Khabib, where he is now versus who he was dating back to 2017, are two entirely different people. One is very brash, the other one is very respectful. We enjoy seeing changes. We love seeing narratives. We love seeing these fighters go through an arc of being one thing to being something else. We enjoy these stories. We enjoy the characters. We love football. We love basketball. We love baseball because we love seeing these athletes change over time and become something and develop or become dynamic characters. And for one championships, let me tell you this right now, Brandon Vera, who is a fighter that I've been following extensively for years, since his time in the UFC, I've watched every single one of his fights and won championships, and he's definitely a fighter who I look at. Now, this isn't the case for all one championship fighters, but I'm specifically pointing out Brandon Vera's case, because Brandon Vera has to be like one of the golden boys for one championships, where he's always presented to be, oh man, this guy is the guy, the star of the heavyweight division, because of Chatri really wanting to make sure that his fighters come across as a certain way in being placed in such a high pedestal. We're not going to see them go through certain arcs the same way we see fighters in the West. And I think that really is a missed opportunity, because Chatri says himself, he says that one of the reasons why he enjoys mixed martial arts fighters is because despite the fact that they all have very different backgrounds, they all come together in unity for their love and for their passion of mixed martial arts. Sadly, we don't see these different walks or different paths of life coming together. We just see fighter A, fighter B going at it for the sake of honor and for pride and for altruism. Chatri definitely has his heart in the right place. I think his product would be a lot more better. I think One Championships would be a lot more better if Chatri had a little bit more of a hands-off approach towards the culture and towards the identity and the presentation of One Championships. I believe both he and Dana White are overbearing to the product, that they're very distracting to the product, to the fighters. Although I respect them for all the hard work they've done to push the UFC and to push One Championships to becoming a great mixed martial arts organization, they both have a tendency of placing themselves on the spotlight, albeit either intentionally or unintentionally, over the fighters who are competing and putting their lives on the line every time they go out there and compete and fight. I just believe that their product could be better if they were just less overbearing. I respect the heck out of the both of them, but I just wish that they were both not as apparent as they usually are when it comes to both One Championships and the UFC. And so with that being said, I definitely enjoyed looking into Chatri Sityodtong. I think he's definitely is an interesting, unique person. A really great, fascinating story. I appreciate and love his altruism for everything that is good and his love and passion for mixed martial arts. It will definitely be interesting to see the future of One Championships and how Chatri Sityodtong will expand on it. So with that being said, you have been an awesome audience. Hopefully you learned as much as I have learning Chatri Sityodtong here and One Championships. All I gotta say is thank you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.